He's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics and an adjunct assistant professor at Georgetown University. Really good to have you back with us, Giorgio. So in the past hour, we've had the Israeli military say that Iran has launched more than 100 drones towards Israel. We heard from our correspondent in Tehran that there's been no comment from the Iranians in terms of that development. But do you expect that to be just the first of Iran's retaliation towards Israel's attacks we saw a number of hours ago?
Yeah, thank you for having me back on the network. You know, this is a very, very dangerous situation. The Iranian homeland has never been targeted on this scale since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, and Iran has no choice but to respond. And while Iran has numerous ways in which it can respond to this Israeli aggression, to be frank, Tehran does not really have any easy options or any good options. I think, obviously, continuation of sort of the same dynamics we saw in 2024 with the missile and drone attacks and counterattacks can take place. But it's also possible that Iran is going to decide to pull out from the NPT and join the small club of countries that have nuclear weapons. That certainly could be the direction that Iran moves in as a response to, I think, what has now been 5 or 6 waves of Israeli strikes against Tehran and other parts of the country. Of course, there are huge concerns about the possibility of Iran attacking U.S. military bases in GCC countries, perhaps other parts of the region. I think Iran would be a little hesitant to do that. I don't think Iran is seeking an all-out conflict with the United States, and also Iran has its own interests in maintaining healthy relations with some of those host countries, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and so on. But again, just to state, Iran is in a position where it has no choice but to respond. There has to be some sort of a face-saving move by the Iranians, but I'll repeat, I don't think Iran has any good options right now.
In terms of the recent bouts of conflict that we've seen between Iran and Israel, it has largely been a tit-for-tat, like-for-like type of attack, hasn't it? We haven't seen either side really push the other to an all-out war. But in this case, as you rightly pointed out, Tehran, Iran's capital, hasn't come under attack like this since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. If we were to use that principle of tit for tat, like for like, Iran could then impose a similar attack on Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel. Is that something you think we might see?
Certainly possible. And, you know, since the Israelis struck Iran back in late October of 2024, Iran has been putting many resources into really, you know, rearming itself and preparing for a situation like this one we're in right now. And I think another point that needs to be considered is that now that Iran has declared that it is not going to be returning to the negotiating table in Oman or Italy to continue more rounds of talks with the U.S., I think we're going to see new dynamics whereby Iran's leadership will assess the costs and the risks of more aggressive behavior in a different manner. Iran, I think, during the time of these talks was always trying to keep the diplomatic momentum going. And I think that was a dynamic that sort of prevented Iran from maybe taking certain actions in the region that could have derailed diplomacy. That's not a factor anymore. We should also consider that, going back to my point about how Iran might consider the question of developing a nuclear weapon or acquiring a nuclear weapon differently, there are voices in Tehran who are going to make the case that had Iran developed nuclear weapons in the past, this attack that took place beginning a few hours ago would not have happened. So I think the Iranian leadership is going to look at many of these security issues very differently. And I think the conversation in Iran is going to be very different moving forward.
In some of his first remarks since Israel launched this latest attack, the US President Donald Trump says he hopes that these strikes will bring Iran back to the negotiating table, referring to the process that you mentioned that's been taking place between Tehran and Washington on a potential new nuclear agreement. But you're saying this would push Iran further away from that process. So do you think that that dialogue has all but ended?
I think it's a little bit absurd to suggest that what just took place is going to result in the Iranians coming to the negotiating table and be willing to make more concessions to the United States. I think those in Iran who are going to argue that negotiating with the Americans was a waste of time, a waste of energy, and a reflection of naive thinking are going to be the ones who have the upper hand. I think that those who argue that there's no point in negotiating with the Americans are going to be making an argument that more people in Iran will find persuasive as a result of this aggression against Iran. As the IRGC has made clear, they see the United States bearing responsibility along with Israel for what just took place. There's a tremendous amount of death and destruction that took place in Iran. You know, many people are talking about nuclear scientists and top military officials, but there were also many women and children who died too. There's some very powerful emotions being felt in Iran, and this idea that it's going to just cause Iran to come back, negotiate with the Americans, and make more concessions. I have a really difficult time imagining that happening. I think we're now in a new situation whereby prospects for any sort of diplomacy between the US and Iran are very, very dim. I am not optimistic about what comes next. I think everyone who wants to see more stability in the region should be absolutely terrified right now.
Okay, Giorgio Cafiero, we'll have to leave it there. But thanks you so much again for joining us on the program.